Hi there, and welcome back to another episode of Business Insights with Mr. Kerridge. We're joined again by Mr. Alan Marshall, who's previously been with us in an episode to talk about human resource management. But today we're going to switch the focus and we're going to look at what does it mean to be a company. In a previous episode, we've looked at what's a sole trader, what's an unincorporated business. Today we're going to move on to say, well, what does it mean to incorporate and why would somebody want to do that when setting up a business? So welcome. Thanks for joining us again.
Thank you, and hello students.
In a previous episode, we talked about your role working within an organisation. Can you just give us a little bit of background in terms of what made you want to start your own business and what was that business? What services did you supply?
Okay, so if you remember in the Business Insights 1, we talked about my HR role in a large multinational organisation. Well, all that came to an end through my choice because I decided I wanted to move on and do something else. So I decided, and I'd always wanted to have my own business, so I decided to create that business. And to do that, I had to consider what type of business would it be. You've already heard about Sole Trader from Business Insights number 2 from Laura the beautician. So I was in the same position as Laura, but slightly different because I wanted to be a limited company. And this time I had to look at it from a slightly different view to Laura. And why would I do that? What is a limited company? So I had to register, think of a company name. And so when doing that, I would have to register that company with an organisation called Companies House in the UK. And that's a registration and also file for a certificate of incorporation. That would mean we'd have shareholders. So shareholders, myself, and I also appointed my wife. I had 4 shares, she had 1. Might sound a little bit unfair, but I was the consultant and she was my administrator, so nothing sort of devious about that. We just needed to have a structure of an organisation. So that's what we did. So we set that up. It was fairly easy to do, not too expensive, and start the ball rolling and set up the company. In doing that, you might sort of say to yourself, well, what else is there to do? We have to think that if we're going to be a company, we're not like Laura in a sole trader. Laura was Laura, and therefore, when Laura had all her sales for a beautician, she took off all her purchases, and what was left over there was her taxable income. Not like that when you get to a limited company, because it's not a person, it's a company. And so my company, I called it Global HR Consultants Limited. Therefore, we had a company.
What made you decide to want to call it Global HR? I heard that word global there, and I thought, what made you want to do that?
Global HR, it meant that in my job, when I was at that big company, I had responsibility for a lot of international entities. Therefore, I picked up lots of knowledge and I really liked working in international sense of HR. Remember what Laura said? You need a passion for the job because you're going to have to put a lot into it, work hard and everything. Well, that's where I had it. I had passion for the international side, and I wanted to appeal to clients, let them see what I did, but I'd seen it on my banner, Global HR Consultants. They know what I do. They might want HR consulting of a localized nature, domestic, UK, let's say. Well, that's fine. I can do that as well. It wouldn't be a detriment to the organisation. They would come along and ask the question. So that's what we did. That's how we set it up. So once we've got that, we've got a kick-off point, if you like, and then we have to figure out, well, we've registered with Companies House. Who else do we register with? So we have to think about taxation. The first thing is VAT, value-added tax. There's a threshold to value-added tax, and I wasn't likely to hit that in the early days of the company, but I still wanted to register, and you can do that. And why did I want to register? Because I wanted people to see that I was perhaps, a bigger organisation than I actually was. So on my correspondence invoices website, I would have my Companies House registered number and have my VAT registered number. Now I'm getting a status and an image that portrays bigger companies that will be my competitors. So if I'm competing with the big boys out there, think about names like Ernst & Young or PricewaterhouseCoopers. Dare I say Deloitte. These are big companies. And if I was competing with them, I needed my potential clients to see me as a bigger organisation than perhaps I was. And therefore, that's how I did it. It was a status and really there for image purposes.
So that was one of the key drivers then really behind you wanting to obviously set up as an incorporated company as opposed to being a sole trader, this sort of image and status you could portray. And just another question on that, you mentioned VAT, just for the student purposes, not in lots of technical detail.
It means that when I invoice a client, if I invoice a client for a contract that's £1,000, I will actually be charging them on that invoice £1,200 because VAT is 20%. So I charge them £1,200 and they send me £1,200, but I have to pay over that £200 to the revenue. But the client I've charged that £200, they can offset their VAT against their sales. So it's called inputs and outputs. Big companies are running with this day in, day out. And therefore I felt I wanted to do that. And it was very successful for me. So this was new. So things like this. And I also had to file statutory accounts for Companies House once a year. So I had to become an accountant, a VAT specialist, many other things.
On that point, you mentioned obviously one of the key drivers around obviously status, image you want to portray. And obviously from the student's point of view, they learn about obviously when you become a company, you've got this separate legal identity. Was that a key thing for you as well in terms of some protection, in terms of when you set your own business up?
Very much so, because we keep making these comparisons and contrasts with the beautician's business as a sole trader. And what happens for me, or what I needed, was the security of a limited company. It means this. The limited company was called Global HR Consultants Limited. And I'm called Alan Marshall. Therefore, if anything went wrong with that company, something, let's just say, I mean, some disaster happened to that company, it wouldn't be me that would be suffering the losses. It would be the global HR consultants would be suffering losses. So let's say it had to wind up. The revenue may be seeking, taxes owed or whatever, and they would come and seek those from global HR consultants, not from Alan Marshall. Therefore, I'm protecting my personal assets by setting up the limited company.
So we've set the company up. You've alluded to some kind of accounting. How did that work in practice for you? Did you do the account? Did you hire somebody to do the accounts? Did you know anything about accounts? How challenging was that?
So we have to look back at Business Insights 2 again and remember what Laura the beautician said, that she worked Tuesday to Saturday, but did on one of her days off, she did her bookkeeping. And that's what happens when you start a small business. It's a commitment. And remember, she said she had a passion for a business. I don't think she had it for bookkeeping, but she knew she had to do it. And just like I didn't have a passion for statutory accounts, but it had to be done. So I bought in some packaged software, very, very popular and well-known one called QuickBooks. Loaded that onto my laptop, entered all my transactions, whether they be sales invoices or purchases, onto that software. And then I could print a report once per month, and I could see reports coming off, one called a trial balance, one called a profit and loss account or P&L, and one called a balance sheet. And this meant I started to learn now, what do these numbers mean? And I started to get more of an understanding of my business and what makes it successful and what doesn't. And therefore you could see line by line entries. And of course, then I could put these reports together, hand them over to my chartered accountant, who I needed to certify my accounts to send to Companies House once a year. And they could do my accounts, but by me giving them these reports, it meant their job was much easier. And therefore the fees were much less, and I probably paid 40% of what the going rate was, because I was already doing probably 80 to 90% of the work. But it's that work that Laura the beautician did on a Monday, and therefore you've got to be able to do that. I used to, when I returned home from a day's consulting, I sat in my office and I did my invoicing on that same day, because I felt it was a way to do it, to keep on top of it, get the invoice off. That meant the money was going to be coming back in. And that's what's important, because we're now going to talk about cash flow. To start up with some cash, remember again, Laura the beautician said she had a startup loan, no different for me. So we have to start up with that and get some cash rolling in as quickly as possible. So we wanted short payment terms, pay within 14 days of the invoice. And then people don't do that, then you end up chasing them. So now you become a credit controller. Like Laura said, she had all these jobs, so did I, and off we go chasing the money. Once we've got built up a cash fund, then we feel much more comfortable about cash flow. In the early days, it's very difficult. And I remember when I first started and I went on training courses, I remember somebody telling me that 80% of new businesses, they fail in the first 2 years because they run out of cash. They haven't got the cash. So it's a cash that kills businesses.
Just on reflection, looking back, from when you started your company and you took it over a period of time, would you have done anything different?
Well, I thought about this, and I'm sure there's lots of different ways of doing all these things. And what I tend to feel is, what was the result? Because I went down a route, not because I thought it was a good way to go. I just didn't know anything else. You just go by your gut sometimes, and yeah, you can read and all the rest of it. But in the end, I felt that I went down a route. I did that business, I ran it for about 10 years, and it was successful. I enjoyed it. I had that passion, like Laura said, and it was great. I'm sure I could have done it different ways, but I think I got the same result.
Thank you for that. Just another point I would ask you: when you were looking to start this business up, did you lean on anybody for advice, or did you find any particular resources really helpful to you in terms of setting up your business? Or if you were a student looking to set your own business up one day, is there any way you could point people to a certain direction?
Yeah, I did. I mentioned earlier, I went on a course, and they said, that and there were all small businesses in this room, this training room. I remember it well. And there were people there, but like Laura, there were people who were going to set up a florist or hairdressers and all these different types of business. And I was sat there as an HR consultant, and I felt a bit out of place because there were all these fairly small businesses, local type arrangement, and so these courses, they exist, and they were government-run courses to help people get off the ground. And also the HMRC revenue I talked about, they ran courses to help you with understanding the VAT or the income tax and social taxes. So there were courses, there were resources there. I mean, nowadays the internet's a great thing, and you can find lots of things there. You've got to make sure you're going in a course that's accredited. It's no good going in a course where somebody's just making money and you don't really know if they're giving you the really proper answers to things, because you're stepping into areas of legislation, and therefore you need to get it right.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. And I just suppose the final one to wrap up with, it's been really insightful, we've looked at in terms of unincorporated business, sole traders, partnerships, then we flipped over to incorporated in terms of the business you set up, some of the drivers around that in terms of status and separate legal identity, some of the challenges around the administration, learning accounts, VAT, what's all that about? But just taking it a step further, if you were in front of a group of students now, what advice would you give them if they were thinking about, well, one day I want to be an entrepreneur, one day I want to set my own business up?
The business plan. This is what it's all about. A good business plan will force you to test your sort of knowledge and test your confidence. You think that your business is going to be the best thing in the world and can't possibly fail. So you want to test it out before you even start it. And the business plan that asks you, what is your marketing strategy? And if you don't know that, straight away we're saying, just a minute, you just think this product you've got or service is fantastic, but prove it. Prove it. Let's have a look. I did a job as an HR consultant, setting up a business, a recruitment consultancy for someone, and they said, oh, well, I'm going to be a recruitment consultant, and they were going to buy in what we call, we mentioned on the interviews in Business Insights 1, they're going to buy in something called psychometric analysis, and I'll leave Mr. Kerridge to explain that on another day, but it was going to cost her £10,000 to buy in all these software, and she got no sales. So that startup loan had to be 10,000, and she got no sales after that. She spent 10,000. Can you see the risk? That going into a business plan, we have to say, well, how are we going to get those sales? How long will it take before we can recover? We'll use these psychometric tests, and when we find a client, then we're going to charge that on at a profit. Now we start to recover that £10,000 plus. but how long will it take? And these are the tests you do in a business plan.
Thank you for that. I think it's a really good point to finish on there in terms of the importance of a business plan. Starting up as a sole trader or a company, the risks associated with starting a new business, and the importance of considering all these things that maybe you've not thought about before, and the importance of marketing and accounts. So thank you for that, and I'm sure we'll hear from you again.
Okay. Bye now.